Level 1. You're 18, stepping into a bank alone for the very first time with the goal of opening an account in your own name. Not as a guest, not as someone accompanying a parent. You are the client now. Inside, the air feels sterile, a mix of air conditioning and printed paper. Lines stretch through the space. They always do. You take a queue number from a machine that spits it out with an almost indifferent slowness, as if time is something you clearly have plenty of. Digital screens around the hall cycle through financial ads and products you don't really understand yet, and no one seems inclined to break them down for you today. You sit, you wait. Eventually, your number appears. At the desk, the bank officer is young, polite in that carefully measured way that customer service training demands. Nothing excessive, nothing missing. He asks what you need. You tell him you want to open an account. He nods, starts typing, requests your documents. Nothing in that exchange makes you feel genuinely welcomed. It feels more like being entered into a system than being received as a person. What you're given is the most basic account available. Stripped down, minimal. In many banks, it comes with monthly maintenance fees hidden in the fine print you technically agreed to, though no one ever spells it out in plain language. It includes withdrawal caps you only discover when you urgently need cash. And if the balance sits at zero for long enough, the account can quietly vanish without any meaningful warning. Your balance is essentially nothing. Money comes in, money goes out, and the cycle repeats endlessly. Meanwhile, the institution circulates that idle cash elsewhere, lending it out at interest. You don't see any of that movement. And if your account ever slips below zero, even because of some automatic charge you forgot about, the tone shifts immediately. Now the bank does reach out, but not to guide you. It reaches out to collect, adding overdraft penalties that, when annualized, resemble interest rates that would make even fictional loan sharks uneasy. Welcome to the system. The mobile app at this level does what it promises on the surface, shows balances, processes, transfers, pays bills. But underneath, it quietly functions as a sales engine. Every login brings new prompts, a personal loan offer, then a credit card suggestion, then an invitation to consider life insurance. It isn't random. The bank has already mapped you, your age range, your spending rhythm, the days your account dips low, the patterns in your cash flow. At this stage, the most profitable version of you is not the saver, it's the borrower. Level 2. Something shifts. Not in a dramatic flash, but enough to change the pattern. You now have steady employment, or a small business that has started to move forward. Or maybe you simply built savings slowly, with discipline that no one really noticed, because no one was watching. Watching quietly, the system updates your profile again. Your average balance now sits somewhere between $1,000 and $10,000. That doesn't make you wealthy. You're still far from that world. But inside the bank's ecosystem, you've shifted categories. You're no longer just a basic account holder. You've become someone who generates enough movement to be interesting. And that's when the tone changes. Not in an obvious way, not like a phone ringing or a banker showing up at your door. It starts with marketing intelligence. Subtle, automated. You receive a carefully crafted email, polished in corporate colors, designed to feel important without ever saying it directly. The subject line suggests you've been selected for a preferred credit card offer. When you open it, there it is. A credit card with a limit around $3,000, paired with a cashback offer of 1.5% on selected purchases. Everything looks appealing at first glance, even generous. But the fine print underneath is dense, layered, and technically precise in a way that becomes almost unreadable in a single sitting. This is where the real mechanism reveals itself. Because this card isn't truly a reward, it's an entry point, a carefully designed mechanism of engagement. In theory, if someone uses it responsibly and clears the full balance every month, the bank barely earns anything from that person. No interest, no debt cycle. But the institution is not betting on that ideal scenario. It's betting on behavior patterns backed by data. Most users won't pay everything off. They'll carry a balance, even a small one, month after month. Minimum payments become routine, and that's where profitability begins. You're told about rewards, points, and travel miles. What you're not told is that those incentives are funded by a far more consistent source: interest payments accumulated across millions of users. At this tier of service, if you walk into a branch with an issue, nothing dramatic happens. You're helped, but without privilege. The wait is reasonable, the service is functional, the tone polite but neutral. No one ignores you, but no one elevates you either. You sit exactly where the majority sits, handled, processed, completed. Still, something internal begins to shift. It shows up in small ways. How you stand when you approach the counter. How your voice stabilizes when you speak to a representative. How you stop asking like someone requesting permission and start speaking like someone using a service they already own access to. Then comes level 3. This is where the system begins to recognize you in a more deliberate way. Not because it suddenly respects you, but because its internal models have flagged you as statistically relevant. Your average balance crosses a threshold embedded deep inside the bank's segmentation logic. They don't call it that in public. Instead, they use terms like customer segmentation, predictive modeling, or other technical language meant to sound neutral and scientific. But the outcome is simple. You've been marked as worth engaging more directly. And that's when something unusual happens. The bank reaches out to you, not to warn you, not to collect, but to offer. A calm, carefully trained voice, often through a phone call, explains that you've been identified as a client with potential. They would like to introduce you to enhanced savings options, including accounts with improved interest rates, tailored to your profile. And for you, someone who has spent years feeling almost erased by the system, that message lands in a strange way. Something inside you reacts immediately, not because you're naive, but because acknowledgement, even when it comes wrapped in a bank's agenda, still feels like being seen. The so-called preferential rate they mention is usually only slightly above inflation. Still, it comes packaged with a polished name and, for the first time, a dedicated contact who actually follows your case. At this stage, another layer quietly opens up. Access to basic investment products. Low-risk funds, certificates of deposit, and similar instruments appear on the table. The bank manages them, and naturally takes a management fee for doing so. These aren't inherently bad tools, but they aren't offered out of generosity either. The real reason is structure. The longer your money stays inside their ecosystem, the more opportunities they have to operate with it. Your capital remains active, but a meaningful portion of what it generates never fully leaves the institution. Even the branch experience begins to shift. In some banks, you're informally assigned a specific account manager. It's not always officially branded that way, but there is now a real person whose name appears in your emails. Someone you can contact directly when something goes wrong, who may not respond instantly, but who does respond within a reasonable time frame. And yet, the waiting line hasn't changed. You still take a number. There's still no VIP lounge, no coffee corner, no visible separation from everyone else. This is still level 4, but the language has changed completely, literally, not just symbolically. The bank no longer refers to you as a simple account holder. You become a preferred client, or a select customer, or another English-branded category designed for this tier. And that change in labeling is not cosmetic. The moment you walk into the branch, the protocol shifts. A separate room becomes available. It isn't always luxurious, and it doesn't always have a view, but it is clearly apart from the main hall. It has comfortable chairs, controlled temperature, sometimes bottled water, coffee, and a neatly designed magazine that almost no one reads. Most importantly, it has something rare in retail banking: silence. You're no longer hearing the general noise of the lobby or watching your number flash on a screen with a robotic voice calling turns. Instead, you're greeted by someone who already knows your name before you say a word. Not because of any intuition, but because they checked the system moments earlier when they saw your arrival. That small detail, just a few seconds of preparation, completely changes the psychology of the interaction. The bank understands that effect very well. That's exactly why it does it. At this level, you may also be connected to a private banking executive or something similar. A person with a direct line of communication to you, not a call center, someone who knows exactly where your funds are allocated and who reaches out when something genuinely relevant appears, rather than when an automated system decides it's time to push another cross-sell opportunity. The fees you were used to paying begin to quietly disappear. Account maintenance charges are waived, International transfers shift to flat or dramatically reduced pricing, and that daily withdrawal cap that once failed you at the worst possible moment is now significantly higher. At this stage, a question naturally starts to surface. Why wasn't banking always like this for you? The answer is blunt enough to feel uncomfortable. Back then, you simply weren't profitable enough. Now you are. You didn't change as a person. The number attached to you did, and that single shift changes everything. The offerings you're shown at this point are objectively stronger. Investment funds come with lower management fees. Diversified portfolios appear that were never visible in the standard mobile app, and loan interest rates drop noticeably. Statistically, you're also a lower-risk borrower, which reshapes the entire pricing logic around you. The system operates on a cold internal rule. It lends cheaply to those who least need credit and charges more to those with no alternatives. It isn't a glitch. It's how it was designed. Level 5 begins where banking stops feeling like a service and starts resembling an ongoing negotiation between two sides that each holds something the other wants. You bring capital. The bank brings infrastructure, financial instruments, and access to markets that would be difficult to reach alone. Neither side is fully dependent, yet neither is fully independent either, and that tension reshapes every interaction. At this stage, the bank no longer waits for you to reach out. Instead, it reaches out to you. Your account manager calls and invites you to lunch, not as a hard sales pitch, but as a way to maintain proximity, to keep the relationship human rather than purely institutional. Those meetings aren't gestures of generosity. They're calculated retention investments. The cost of a monthly lunch is negligible compared to the revenue your assets generate. The financial tools now available are significantly more advanced. You move beyond standard market tracking funds into private investment structures, structured notes, and instruments whose returns fluctuate based on specific underlying indices. Portfolio strategies become more complex, often including hedging mechanisms and products reserved for what the system labels as qualified investors. Not every one of these instruments is necessarily beneficial. Some contain embedded fee structures that quietly erode real returns. The difference now is that you finally have enough access, information, and leverage to ask better questions, and more importantly, to receive real answers when you do. And it's no longer delivered with the same rough edges of openness you saw before. The information may still be selective, but it arrives in far greater depth than at earlier stages. If you ever walk into a branch now, you won't find a line that fits your profile anymore. Instead, you're guided into a private room. There's discretion, a closed-door setting, and a type of conversation that simply didn't exist in the lower tiers of banking. Suddenly, they begin discussing something entirely new: wealth structuring, inheritance design, and how to organize your assets so they grow more efficiently, minimize taxation, and transition to the next generation with maximum effectiveness. It's not driven by generosity. The institution acts because anchoring your capital inside their long-term frameworks means predictable revenue streams for them over many years. Still, from your side, the value can be very real if you learn to read what's actually being implied rather than what's explicitly said. At this point, another reality quietly emerges, one nobody really warns you about: the subtle isolation that comes with possessing more than most people around you can even conceptualize. Conversations with friends, relatives, and longtime acquaintances begin to shift. Where there used to be ease, now there are pauses. Not because you've fundamentally changed as a person, but because money at a certain scale reshapes relational dynamics without anyone acknowledging it directly. Some people approach differently, others drift away, and you're left learning how to navigate a social landscape that was never taught in any handbook. This is level 6. In the banking world, it carries a distinct label: private banking. And the shift here is not incremental, it's structural. Once your assets under management cross the $1 million threshold with a financial institution, the relationship is no longer just client and provider. From the outside, it can even resemble a form of partnership. Your former account manager is no longer simply handling transactions. They become a dedicated wealth advisor with advanced certifications in financial planning, often supported by an entire team working behind the scenes. They don't call to push generic offers. They reach out because they've analyzed your situation in detail and believe something relevant has surfaced specifically for you. By this stage, somewhere inside the bank exists a comprehensive profile that maps your financial behavior, risk appetite, long-term objectives, and future obligations in greater detail than you might be able to clearly express yourself if asked to write it all down. And the opportunities available here don't appear in apps or marketing campaigns. They are never promoted through ads or mass emails. Instead, they emerge in tailored conversations, backed by projections, tax impact analysis, and highly specific structuring proposals. These can include restricted investment funds, private equity access, co-investment opportunities in institutional real estate projects, and legally established offshore arrangements designed for tax efficiency at capital scales where such tools actually become meaningful. This is the point that business magazines almost never spell out with this level of honesty. Once you reach this tier, the rules that apply to everyone below you stop being fixed and start becoming flexible. Pricing is no longer a printed catalog of rates. It becomes something shaped in discussion. Loan conditions are not primarily driven by an automated credit score anymore. They hinge on your relationship with the bank, your history with them, and how strategically valuable you are at that moment. Think back to those maintenance fees charged to clients at the lowest tier. When added across millions of small accounts, that steady flow becomes part of what finances the elevated service experience reserved for top-tier clients. It isn't a cinematic scheme of intent or malice. It's simply a structure that channels resources toward places where resources already exist. If you ever step into a branch at this level, it may not feel like a bank at all. It resembles the meeting space of a consulting firm more than a traditional financial office. There are curated artworks on the walls, the coffee is genuinely good, and privacy is absolute. Not just as a courtesy, but because confidentiality itself is part of what is being sold. Something else begins to appear here that is hard to explain unless you've lived it. There's a subtle sense that the bank actually needs you. Not in an exaggerated or absolute sense, but in a way that creates a balance that simply didn't exist in earlier tiers. And that shift does something strange to your mindset. For years, you are conditioned to approach the bank from a position of limited leverage, asking, waiting, accepting whatever is offered. When that dynamic flips, and the institution starts adjusting its terms to keep you, the first emotional response is not always satisfaction. Often, it is a quiet form of frustration. You remember every fee you paid before, every loan that came with high interest because the system deemed it appropriate at the time. And now, simply because the numbers have changed, everything else shifts with them. You realize it was never that the system changed around you. It changed how it prices you. There are a few underlying truths that cut across every level, even if no executive, app, or contract ever states them plainly. First, the bank is not your partner. It is a provider of financial services. The difference matters. A partner aligns with your interests. A provider operates with its own priorities. That doesn't make it an enemy, but it does define the nature of the relationship and how you should approach it. The second truth is that credit is the most profitable product a bank offers, and it is presented to you precisely when you are most likely to need it, meaning also when you are least equipped to fully calculate its real long-term cost. That is not random. It is intentional product design. Thirdly, the gap between a customer starting from zero and one who holds $1,000 is not explained purely by how much money they have. What matters just as much is time. Funds that have been sitting in the bank longer, that show a history and move in a predictable way, are worth more to the system than identical money that just arrived. In banking, loyalty is not emotional, it is statistical. The fourth point, and the one many people find uncomfortable, is that the entire banking structure is built so that most clients remain within the first three tiers, not through obvious harm or conspiracy, but through inertia, easy credit that feels harmless, the natural push toward spending before you ever get the chance to build wealth, and the lack of visibility into what higher levels actually receive. Someone at level 1 has no real idea what a level 6 client experiences. That lack of transparency is not an accident. A bank opens at 9 a.m. today, just as it did yesterday, and just as it will tomorrow. Right now, somewhere, a person is standing in line holding a ticket with a number on it, waiting to open their very first account. They carry their ID, they have their address memorized, and they bring a small deposit that feels significant to them. But they don't understand what lies ahead. They don't yet realize that the system they are entering will not treat them the same way in 10 or 20 years, and that the service they receive today reflects their category, not their individuality. And even if you explained all of this to them right now, it likely wouldn't change their behavior. Some lessons only become real through experience, when you sign a credit agreement whose interest rate you didn't fully grasp, when unexpected fees appear on your statement, or when you step into a different service area for the first time and quietly understand that access itself has a price. But there is still one thing that can shift today: how you choose to relate to the system. A bank is not your family, not your friend, and not your enemy. It is infrastructure built to grow the capital of its shareholders. And if you approach it with that clarity, if you stop being passive inside it and start reading how it actually works, you can begin to use it instead of being used by it. It is not simple, and it is not fast, but it starts with something basic. Finally learning the rules of a game you have been playing for years without ever being taught them properly. Now you know them. What you do with that knowledge is up to you.